From Wacko Chaco Studio, I'm Ashwin Chaco, and this is The Fruitful Life, a show about the business of creativity and the stories behind the creators that have made their dreams a reality. Hey, folks, welcome to The Fruitful Life, Ben of Boring Friends. Hi, Ben.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Ben. I run a small little design company called Boring Friends, and I'm a graphic designer. So everything from client work to running my own little online shop where I sell like apparel and soft goods. That's a big part of what takes up my day. That's me.
That's so cool. And I can't wait to hear more about it. But before we do, I like to start off with this question. If there was any fruit you could be, what fruit would it be and why?
Oh my God. I wasn't prepared for these hard hitting, extremely personal. Uh, you know what? I've been eating a lot of oranges lately. Let's just go with an orange. Man, I don't have a good reason for you. They're just really delicious.
That's
Simple, straightforward,
that works
delicious
too.
orange. You can grind it up into a juice. You can eat it with the peel on. You shouldn't, but you could.
Cool. That's a good one. So tell me a little bit more about you and your journey. Were you always creative as a kid? Did you draw a lot? Like, what drew you down the path you're on today?
Yeah, I as a kid, I wouldn't say that I was as not as artistic in the sort of drawing and creating art sense. I was like a big music kid, so I started taking like piano lessons when I was really young. Did that for a long time, and then switched, to eventually getting tired of playing piano and having to take lessons and do concerts and whatever, and moved into playing like drums and guitar and starting my own bands when I was, in my early teens, and then that stuff kind of kept up for a long time as well. And then all the while in the background, I was like teaching myself graphic design and some sort of artistic stuff like that, and then ended up going to school for a program that was, had graphic design elements, but also sort of touched on a million other things. So the program I took was like graphic design and illustration, but also like web design and programming and math and physics and you know business development and product design and the whole thing. So you kind of got your hands dirty with everything, but you never really got to specialize in one specific thing. Graphic design was part of the journey, and just sort of becoming very familiar with like tech and media, and yeah, graduated from that and then freelanced for a little bit, and then took my first like full-time graphic design gig, which I did for about a year, and then went from there to work at Shopify for the better part of like 100 years, I guess.
Oh, no way.
I forget how long I was there for exactly. I think I hit like 8.5 years or something like that. Um, Before leaving that to sort of branch out on my own and sort of do this whole freelance thing by myself. And in the last like I think like year or two that I was there was when Boring Friends sort of started. Because I was always like a graphic designer who like couldn't draw. Like I sort of relied a lot on Adobe software or just like software in general to make my sort of ideas come to life, which is like fine. You can do fine just using like a mouse and a keyboard to make drawings and stuff like that, but I feel like you really expand your horizons a lot once you can actually sit down and like make something with your hands and then turn it into something digital from there. So yeah, I've really only been doing the whole drawing thing for like about 5 years now, 5 to 6 years. So I still feel very like brand new and fresh to doing it in that way. But it's been cool. It's been fun.
Well, you're doing a good job so far. Love
Appreciate
the
it.
stuff. So you said you worked at Shopify. I suppose that must have done a lot to show you the behind the process, setting up a website, producing products and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I was there for long enough and the company like grew enough in that time that the nature of what I was doing in the company changed quite a bit in the span of all those years. So like I started there actually being more on like the coding side. So like the first few years I was there, I was doing I was on like their theme support team. So people would like make like Shopify themes and code them, and then it would be up to my team to like sort of support them and debug them, help clients set up their own Shopify store and do any like customizations and coding work for them. Which was fine and like interesting and challenging, but I've never been like all that obsessed with front end development or anything like that. Like it was just sort of an interesting problem to solve, and all the while I was kind of doing more and more of like teaching myself in the background how to do more graphic design oriented stuff, and like doing tutorials and going home and like teaching myself some stuff. So I sort of slowly made the transition over to their design team. So I started off on like their offline marketing team. So I would do a lot of like collateral for like in-person events and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, and then eventually just sort of moved on to like more general sort of like UX marketing. So did a lot of like landing pages, did some illustrative work here and there. Like it was always something I was like dabbling in, and like I would just sort of like fill a hole, or like fill like some sort of need or gap when we needed like illustrative work for a certain piece. So with my entry level skills into illustration at that point, I could like sort of provide for that. But yeah, I mean, like throughout the whole time I was there, I feel like I sort of wore a whole bunch of different hats and tried a whole bunch of different stuff, until realizing I didn't want to really do almost any of those, and I wanted to branch out and sort of do this stuff on my own.
What sort of was like, was there a catalyst moment with making you or pushing you out the door? Did you get to a situation where you were like uncomfortable, or you were like, okay, I've had enough of this and I just want to draw, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was sort of a combination of a bunch of things. Like I said, like sort of in my last little while that I was there was when I was starting to learn to draw more seriously, and boring friends existed, but it was like very very new. Like I think within the same year that I quit, I had like started to learn to draw, and had launched like some products and stuff like that. Like I at that point the drawings were like pretty basic and pretty simple, but every so often I would draw something and someone would ask when they could get it on like a t-shirt or a mug or something like that. And at that point, it wasn't even something that I had like considered previously. Like I had actually worked, for Shopify for the better part of like 10 years, but I'd never had my own online store that I was running.
Yeah.
Um, so it was under my nose the whole time. So finally got around to like set up an online shop, and I sort of did like some like just sort of quick like print on demand products, just to see what that was like. And then once you experience the feeling of like making a product that's like completely coming from inside and just from some like crazy idea you had in your head, and then being able to like put it out there in the world, and someone would actually like give you money so that they could wear that shirt around or like drink coffee out of that mug or whatever. It's like a pretty cool feeling, and it's like it's kind of addicting once you tap that a little bit. So um yeah, like I think I was messing around more and more with the boring friends stuff. I think once you're kind of anywhere for like 8 something years, you're just gonna get a little bit anxious to branch out and try something new and find something to be excited about. Um, and I was in a position where I could leave and just sort of like see what's out there, and support myself for a while and just sort of see how it goes. Like when I left, I didn't leave with this picture in mind of what it is that I'm doing today. Like it's not that I had this like, because that was about 3 years ago now. It's not like I had this 3-year plan, and then here I am today doing exactly what it was that I had like charted out. Like I sort of left expecting that I was gonna do the stuff that I was doing previously at Shopify. So any of like the UX work, website work, whatever, to sort of support myself and pay the bills. And then on the other side, I'll see where this sort of like cartoony drawing stuff goes. But who knows if there's anything there. And then I think probably within like the first few months, I decided to just kind of like merge the two. Like I sort of had like, Ben Courtice graphic designer for hire, freelance, whatever, and then Boring Friends, which was just it was pretty like cartoony and comicky then, but was sort of like starting to find my style and starting to understand what it was that I wanted to do with that. And then at some point, I just decided to merge the two because it was a lot less complicated that way. And then things just started slowly, I don't know, I guess like revealing themselves to me in a way to be like I was able to sort of follow what I found interesting and follow what got me out of bed in the morning. And so, I don't really do web design stuff anymore. I don't really do UX stuff anymore. I just do the things that I find interesting.
That's it's like fascinating hearing that you stuck it out for 8 years. I haven't come across many creatives who have, stuck in a job for more than a year or 2. Especially nowadays, there seems to be a, like, jump every year or so,
Yeah, I
and
think I think like creatives or even just people in the tech industry in general,
yeah.
like 8 years in the tech industry, I think makes you like ancient, basically.
So would you say it was around 2020 that it shifted that your illustrative work started taking off, or was it after that?
Yeah, well, like I quit Shopify like late 2019, so just
Okay.
like a handful of months before COVID. So, I quit and I like, I had pictured being like, all right, the next few months, like I'm not doing anything. Like I have been working nonstop for all these years, so I'm just gonna like take it real easy. And I was like, in the next year, I'm gonna like travel a whole bunch, and I'm gonna like do some self discovery and whatever. And nothing can get in the way of me participating in that. So, yeah, and yeah, COVID hit, and all of a sudden, I kind of had to rethink everything. So, I mean, in a way, it helped me sort of stay inside, and I got to draw a lot and experiment a lot, and it gave me a lot more time to like not have to worry about other responsibilities because there kind of just wasn't anything else. So, as a means of distracting myself, just got to make art and kind of fart around and develop my style a little bit. So it kind of worked out in that way, and then didn't work out in about 100 other ways that we don't have to get into about COVID. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, really interesting time to just sort of throw a wrench in the gears of my life and rethink everything right before a major pandemic.
No, I can totally relate. I think, like, 2019, I decided I was gonna go illustration full time, so no more graphic design jobs, and then, of course, the pandemic hit. Luckily, just before, I'd had a huge job, so everything sort of, I was sort of set up, and I just like you, I think it helped me a lot to sort of clarify the direction I wanted to go with my work and also hone in on my illustrative style. So curious about this because I think every illustrator gets asked this. How did or what how did you develop your style within that period? Were there specific questions you were asking yourself? Were there things that you were drawn to that created your style, or maybe there's an ethos behind it? Tell me a little about that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever thought very, very purposely about like exactly what direction I wanted my style to go in. And even now when I feel like I do draw or like create things in a more consistent manner, and I suppose like there is a style to it, but I never really feel like it's complete and I've like achieved the style that I want, and that's what I stick to, and it's always going to look the same. Like I always feel like pretty much with anything that I make that I'm always like iterating bit by bit on the style itself. So even when I had a ton of free time to like try things out a few years ago and I was just sort of experimenting, like I don't know if I had this like goalpost or whatever, or like anything that I was working towards, as much as I was just sort of like taking in all these different types of influences and all these different art styles, and just sort of seeing what would happen if I tried to recreate those things on my own, or like taking little pieces of this over here and mixing it with a thing over there. It's really just for me like more of a practice in like curiosity around like seeing art that I enjoy and art that I like, and then thinking to myself like, okay, if I sat down, could I just like recreate that on my own? Like, am I able to, um, take certain elements of it and see if I can make that with the tools that I have at my disposal? And if not, then I'll start messing around and seeing how it is that someone gets to that stage. And I think just through the process of doing that kind of thing, you end up kind of like crafting your own style because you're inevitably going to be putting your own spin on the stuff that you're making because it's being drawn by your hand and it's being processed by your brain, and
Mm.
everything about it's going to have its own unique little spin about it. And I
Like,
think you just kind of do that enough times that certain things tend to stick, and then certain things come out in like a certain way when you go to make a piece of art for yourself or something that you want to be able to like share with the world. You're kind of like picking and choosing from all these little micro influences that you've gathered along the way.
I think that's so true. I think too many illustrators put pressure on themselves that, you have to set this style and then you're stuck. This is it. And that sort of like prevents them from getting to it in the first place. And then when they do find something, then they feel like they're imprisoned by their style. Whereas I think if we look even at the masters, they were always iterating within their work, and the style shifted with us because our taste shifts, our what we like shifts over time. I mean, what I liked as a teenager is completely different from what I like now, and so my style should sort of evolve to take in those observations, because I think as illustrators, our style is the bridge between who we are and what we want to say. And this is sort of the language that we're using in that current period. And I think you
Yeah,
make a
absolutely.
good point with, it's um you find inspiration, then you imitate it, then you iterate, and then you innovate, so like the four eyes, as I call it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that it's exactly like you said. It would be kind of crazy to always stick to the same style, or not like crazy as much as just like, at least for me personally, picturing having to always do the same thing over and over. I don't think I would be able to handle it. Like I'm a little bit too stir crazy and antsy to just always do the same thing over and over. Like in order to like keep my own attention, I've got to switch things up, and I've got to find new ways of like communicating certain ideas or expressing myself. Because yeah, otherwise you're just gonna end up kind of doing the same thing over and over, and that's not a fun place to be either. And
I should.
that's the thing too, is that there's really no like shortcut to finding your
Mm,
style either, right? Like there isn't
yeah.
some sort of like, you can take as many courses or read as many books on like finding your style as an artist or an illustrator, and I'm sure
Yeah.
they're full of like good advice about like where to find inspiration or like things you can try out. But at the end of the day, like your own style that looks like you and feels unique is only going to come through um months or years or whatever of just trying stuff out and making so much stuff that you figure out what works and you figure out what feels good, and you do it enough times that you have a better understanding of what it looks like.
Yeah, it's like throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, sort of thing.
Basically, yeah.
And I'm curious about like how much is play a part of your process? Do you play a lot with, textures, tones, or like just the idea of playing at work? Is that important? Is that a part of your practice?
Yeah, I think it's super important. Like I really try to spend enough time just sort of like doing loose creative work where I haven't really set any specific expectations for what it is that I want to come out on the other end. Just sit down and draw, or just sit down and either like sketch or scribble or like do whatever it is that you want, just as a means of like keeping things loose and just sort of seeing what comes out on the other end. Like I'm not as good as doing this consistently lately, but I usually try to like frequently set like sort of a timer and just like sit down and have like I'll tell myself I have like 15 minutes to just like put stuff on paper. Like it can be whatever it is that I want. Like just like put a bunch of lines down, or try to sketch something that's in front of me, or try to like recreate something that I like, or just sort of free form start drawing and start creating. And if the timer goes off after whatever it is, 15 minutes or 30 minutes, and I hate it all and it was all frustrating, and I don't feel like any good came out of it, then I can still be like okay with that. I can still be happy with that because I still did something that day, and I'm still keeping the ball moving, I'm still
Mm,
growing. But like more often than not, if you just sit down and do that for long enough, like something's going to kind of click. Like you're going to, two lines are going to kind of meet in a certain way where you're like, oh, I think there might be like something there, or like you've drawn out like two elements on the page that are interesting that you never
mm.
thought would work well together within a piece, and then your brain starts to sort of forming these connections, and then all of a sudden you have an idea for a piece, and then um, for me, once that sort of click happens, I'm kind of like, I'm not doing anything else until that idea is like expressed and that idea is out there and I've like made some sort of piece of art out of it. Like I get a little bit um obsessed with the idea, and then, won't eat or like get out of my chair until it's done. And then my shoulders hurt and the sun's gone down or something.
Yeah, that's so like important. The idea of like setting yourself playtime, and I try to do that in my own practice as well. And for me, most recently, because I do so much work digitally, it's like, okay, let me get off the computer, let me get off the pad, and I've been using like ink and a brush, so I'm doing these like one-off
Oh, nice.
sketches where I don't draw with a pencil. You just have to like
Just gotta
go
go with
for
it.
it. So
No
like
choice.
it takes away the fear of like messing
Yeah.
up and like trying to perfect things. It's like leaning into some of those imperfections, and that's part of the style as well, is like, when you lean into the mistakes you have, it can produce something really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's how that kind of thing is going to evolve, right? From all these little pieces that are different from before, and then all of a sudden there's a mistake that, like, it starts as a mistake, but then you see how it fits in the greater scheme of things, and you're like, hold on, like this could actually work, and I'm going to try and make that mistake again and see what it looks like.
Yeah, do it on purpose the second time
Exactly.
around. But if we don't give ourselves the space to do that, then that possibility is gone. It's so much about pursuing our curiosity. Like you said, that idea comes, and then it kind of niggles at you until you kind of express it properly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious with you. You've been, unlike a lot of different artists, you've been exceptionally good at building a social media presence or building a personal brand, as it were. Uh, Tell me about like what's the story behind the name Boring Friends? Where did that come from? And how did you go about building your personal brand?
Right. I mean, the story behind the name is not really that interesting, to be honest. It was like I
Was
mentioned,
it
like I
boring?
started. Yeah, it was pretty boring, and friends were there. No, they weren't. Um, but yeah, like as I'd mentioned, like five something years ago, I started taking the drawing stuff more seriously. Um, which really just started out as, I think I really just wanted a way to like have some way of adding art or like illustration to just like dumb fart jokes that were like in my head or whatever. But in the process was still like challenging myself to learn to draw or like sketch things in the room or just like experiment. And so eventually I had enough stuff that I felt like, why don't I just like start an Instagram and I'll start posting the stuff there and just like see what happens and see where it goes with sort of zero expectation. And honestly, I think I was just like sitting in a coffee shop when I decided I was going to like open up an Instagram account. And I like, the first thing it's going to ask you when you start something like that is what the name of it's going to be. And I don't like, I think Boring Friends just popped into my head. Like it just sounded kind of ridiculous and silly. And, I wasn't taking it all that serious back then anyway. So I was like, all right, that sticks. The username is not taken. So that's like enough of a qualification for me. So let's go. So that's what I did. Um, in terms of like growing things though, I mean, yeah, I mean, it has evolved a lot from what it looked like 5 years ago. I mean, I think even if right now you scroll down to like the bottom of my Instagram page, I've removed like a large chunk of what was there previously when I was starting out because it's like, now I'm on an account where I'm trying to convince people to hire me and to, to believe in the skills that I have or whatever. But some of it's still there, and it's kind of weird and out there, and clearly I'm just like experimenting. But at some point, I shifted to it not always just being about like comics or making jokes or whatever, and it became more about like making art and like representing ideas or feelings. So kind of just like leaned into that, and then on top of that, like for probably at least like the first few years of me running it, like it existed as like an art account. So all that was on there was just art and the art that I was making, which is cool and is like the whole point. But there was really nothing about the person making it. Like there was no sort of like behind the scenes of like who's doing this stuff and why are they doing it and what are they thinking about and how did they get here and whatever. So I just started making the journey a little bit, or not the journey, but made the account a little bit more about my journey and who I am and where I'm at, um, as well as sort of making it also about like showing other people the way of like how I got there, or
Mm.
trying to express the idea that like sort of here's where I am. I've only been doing it for a handful of years. If I can make it after a few years of doing this stuff, then so can anyone else, really. And so I think once I started making it a little bit more authentic to me and started showing a bit of the behind the scenes and talking about who I am and what I do, that's when people started catching on more. Like I think people start to relate more once they understand who it is that's doing that stuff, because a lot of people are sort of at similar places in their journey, so they want to see what's working for others, right? And yeah, it's just kind of taken off from there. I think I got kind of lucky as well that like I started doing reels and TikToks and whatever right around when it started like taking off a little bit, um, which was foreign to me. Like I had never really done video content, and like still to this day, it's not really like a comfortable thing for me. Like I don't love to like just sit in front of a camera and like talk on my own to nobody because it makes me feel like I'm just like talking to myself and like screaming into the void. But yeah, I started messing around with video stuff, and those, every so often you get one of those that kind of takes off, and that gets a lot more eyes in front of your work and shows people what you're doing. So um, just just kind of went with it, and I try to iterate um, or reiterate to people over and over that like all of this is just me flying by the seat of my pants. Like I'm just sort of like figuring it out as it goes, and it seems to be going okay. But a lot of it is just guesswork, and a lot of it's getting lucky, or having done enough work ahead of time that when you do get lucky with certain things, that you're ready to show up and do certain work, or present yourself in a way that's interesting and that people latch onto.
I like to call it positioning yourself to get lucky, because you sort of have to do all the hard work, and then the opportunities might be there, but maybe you're not ready for it. And so if you position yourself by doing the work, then when the opportunity comes, you're ready to go. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you said some really important things there for illustrators all over who might be listening to this. Um, Ben's point about the fact that the audience really wants to connect with the person behind the art than the art itself. The art is almost like the vessel, and then the person is where the connection really happens. And so as soon as Ben started putting himself in front of the account and the camera, then they're connecting to the person, and they like the person, so they like the art, and they like the art, so they like the person. And it's this kind of like yin yang effect, or
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean, I think it helps to have both, right? I
yeah,
mean, there's
yeah.
plenty of like amazing art accounts out there and amazing artists who, their social media presence is not at all about them, and it's really just about the art, and those are great as well. But yeah, for me, I think especially because I wanted to shine a bit of light on the whole sort of like anyone can do this
Mm.
attitude. I think it's important to show the person who's doing it.
And where did that kind of thought come from? Was it almost like pep talking yourself through the process? You're like, anyone can do this. Yes.
I mean, kind of, yeah. Like, I think again because the illustration side of things and the drawing side of things still feels like such a brand new thing to me, and
Mm,
because previous to any of this, I had always kind of like dismissed myself as there's people who can either you're born and you can draw or you can not draw, and for decades I was a person who could not draw, doomed forever to live and die that way with no skills in the drawing department. But then realized that drawing was a learnable, teachable skill just like any other. And then had a bit of like a moment realizing that if I could spend my whole life being convinced that I can't draw, and I'll have to do everything I can to just work around that and like exist within the creative field but not be able to draw and just be frustrated by that.
yeah.
But then one day realized that I can actually do these types of things and that I have it within
Mm,
me to like create this type of work. Then obviously there are going to be tons of other people out there who are of the same mindset, right? Who just sort of like dismiss what they're capable of and what they're capable of learning because they have some attitude or some sort of like preconceived notion that this just isn't for them, or they don't like have those types of skills and they never will. Whereas like the reality is that it's just a matter of sitting down and actually wanting to be able to do it and actually doing enough of the work that you get better at it.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Everybody can draw if they choose to. Like because I write children's books. I do events at schools, uh, author reading and stuff like that, as well as drawing with kids. And I also do motivational speaking with adults. And if I go into a room full of kids and ask them who here can draw, every
All of them.
hand in the room goes
Yeah.
up, and they all love it. And then you go into an auditorium full of adults and you'll have like five people put their
Yes,
hand up.
crickets.
Yeah. And
But it's interesting, right? It's like when like I wonder if you go through all of those, like follow all of those kids through their journeys
yeah.
and find like the moment in their life where their hand went from being up to being down, right? Like what was it that did that to them? Was it like a teacher telling them that what they
Mm,
made was
yeah.
bad? Or was it them just comparing themselves to others and feeling very like frustrated about it and just deciding that they couldn't do it anymore? It's interesting to think about like what caused people to make that shift because like you said, everyone starts off not caring. Everyone
Yeah.
can draw it.
Yeah.
Like kids are just going to take the most simplistic view because you're just asking them like who here can take a crayon and put lines on a piece of paper, and
Yeah.
every 5-year-old will be like, yeah, I can do that. Like that's pretty simple. And you're asking the same question to a bunch of
Yeah.
adults, but they're hearing it as like, okay, who here can take an expensive pen and recreate you know
The
uh
Mona Lisa.
yeah, the Mona Lisa, or like draw an entire block of like complex architecture, or like do
Mm,
an accurate portrait, or draw a comic book or whatever. And they'll say, well, I can't do that. That's not something I can do. But that's really not what the question is, right?
yeah. I think there needs to be a differentiation between creating art and drawing, because I think there's something very primal about drawing in the sense that, as old as stories have been, so has drawing been. We were drawing on caves to express those stories, to help visualize some of the tales and make them more powerful. And I think that same process comes across in drawing. And I think drawing's also sort of how we think a lot of time. So there's this interesting study I read about where they had two groups. One group was on a phone call and they weren't allowed to doodle. They weren't allowed to do anything with their hands. They just had to listen to the conversation. The other group was given the ability to doodle and draw and do whatever they want with their hands while they listened to the conversation. And at the end of the study, they found 80% of the people who did doodle with their hands remembered the conversation, but majority of the people in the non-drawing group didn't remember the conversation. So there's something about the tactility of using your hands in connection with memory and our ability to, um, retain that information and then be able to reverbalize it.
Yeah, although I would imagine like the norm at a lot of jobs and businesses right now is like if you're in a meeting with someone and you're supposed to be listening and this guy's just like drawing flowers all over the page, um, let's fire
Yeah,
that guy. Let's
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Like that guy's supposed to be our accountant. Like what's he doing? Pay attention. Write
That's true.
numbers.
I think, I feel like the school systems or the education system has a lot to answer to the stifling of young creative minds because they go in with all these ideas and they come out like factory buttons, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think education systems basically all around the world are all set up to just like pump out a bunch of people who are ready to go work, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's all just about it. Like it's less about learning useful life skills, and it's more about just being sort of like molded into this type of person who will say, yes, I will show up to a job that I don't like from 9 to 5 every day because that's what I did for my entire childhood going to
yeah,
school, and so
yeah.
that's what's just expected of me. It's expected of me to like not have more than however many hours of free time in a day, and that
Mm,
art and expression should only be like a secondary thing that I can do once whatever the bills are paid or the kitchen's clean or once I've put in all this like overtime or whatever. That's what school's about, right? It's about like
yeah.
teaching us to just be those types of citizens rather than actually learning useful life skills. Like how many classes did you take growing up that were either about like interpersonal skills or relationships or like how we talk to one another, or like even just like how many art classes did you get versus how many you know math classes or history classes or whatever, which like I don't know, I don't use that much math in my day to day. I'm sure certain people do and they had to learn the basics at some point,
Yeah.
but we really put an emphasis on all this other stuff and not on the things that we're most likely to like require in our day-to-day lives, right?
Well, even if they taught us how to do our taxes, that would be really helpful. It's like, you
I think they're starting to I might be wrong with this. I think over here they're starting to have sort of like financial literacy
mm,
courses when you're younger because like yeah, like I still probably don't know what I'm doing. I
oh
don't know.
gosh.
Like no one ever taught anyone. Like we just show up and one day we owe a whole bunch of money to the government
Exactly.
and then we just guess.
Yeah.
And if you're wrong, go to jail.
All I can say is thank goodness for my accountant.
So
um, but yeah, speaking of this, working within a job and then switching to creating your own job and creating your own work, how did you go about um, attracting clients? Was there a process that you used? Were there any hot tips that you have for any of our listeners?
honestly, like I think I've kind of lucked out where sort of like I left my job and I was still willing to do like the work that I was doing at my last job to like pay bills for when I left the job. So I still had enough like contacts and enough people sort of reaching out about doing some work here and there, that I was able to find that type of work. And
Mm,
then on the side, I was doing all this sort of drawing stuff and all the boring friends stuff. And I feel like um like it kind of shifted just at the right time where I was like once I started losing interest in the UX type of work, all the boring friend stuff was starting to like kind of get enough attention, and it was in front of enough people that people were starting to reach out for me to like do work with boring friends. So I'm in a pretty lucky position right now where like the vast majority of people who I end up doing work for or like working with reach out to me. Like they find me
mm.
typically via like social media or word of mouth from like other clients, and they reach out and then we start talking about their projects and what they want to get involved with and how they want to collaborate. So Yeah, I mean, I'm in a pretty lucky spot where like I haven't ever really had to go send out like 200 cold emails to be like, here's my portfolio, here's my work, here's what I do. Um, I'm lucky in terms of that, but I'm also at a point now where like I feel like I need to do a little bit more outreach. Yes, I'm very lucky that I'm in this spot where like clients come to me, that can be enough for me to like fill my books, and then I can just work on that. But then, I can't help but think like, okay, if these are the clients that are coming to me on their own, like what about if I just actually approached people directly just to
Mm.
see who else would be interested because they just didn't know that I existed previously, right? So that might be a new thing that I'll be doing soon, is like a little bit more outreach in that way.
I think it just shows the power of social media and building a personal brand. If uh, it always makes me think of Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come, you know? And so you went about producing the work before you even had the clients to meet the expectation. And then through that process of clarifying your message and the type of work you want to create, you attracted the type of create clients who were interested in that work. And so the idea of pulling a tribe that is interested in you and what you produce, I think is the best situation you can be as a creator. Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's another thing I'm pretty lucky with at this point too, is that like people are coming to me to do work, to do stuff that looks like my stuff. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like they're not
yeah.
asking me to. They don't have like 10 different other artists whose work they like better, and they say, make us some version of how this other person does work. They see my work and they say like, we want some version of this for our brand or for our business or for our project or whatever. Um, but yeah, like you said, like in terms of like the sort of if you build it, they'll come. Um, a lot of people I think worry about, what do they put in a portfolio and what do they show off in order to gain those types of clients, and people will have sort of self-defeating ideas of being like, well, I want to do logo design, but I don't have enough logo experience or logos that I've actually done for people to show off in order to get those jobs. And they just have this sort of chicken and egg situation,
Mm,
where they're stuck. But there's nothing stopping you from just making a bunch of logos for like fake businesses and putting them up in your portfolio. Like people just want to see what you're capable of. They don't care if
yes.
someone had already paid you for it or like how much it costs someone else to hire you to do that. They just want to see that like you can have this thought and put it out there. I mean, you don't have to like lie in your portfolio and like
Yeah.
pretend that that business exists and do some big like you know uh run some scheme about how like you have all these clients that aren't like real clients or whatever. You can just like you can be upfront and just say like, I decided I wanted to make a bunch of logos for this coffee shop that doesn't exist, or for this like record store, or whatever it is. And just do a whole set of branding for them, do some logos and some illustrations and some colors, and expand it and make mock-ups and whatever, and just show it off to the world. People just want to see the end product and know that you're capable of that.
I think that is so on point, and lots of designers need to hear that because um, uh, actually, like for myself in 2018, I saw everybody doing hand lettering, and I was like, "Oh, this is dope! I want to do that." But again, I had nothing in my portfolio, so I did a 30-day challenge on Instagram where I posted every day, and then that turned into a book. And then I took that book to art directors and said, "Hey, this is what I can do." And then I started getting hired to do typography. So, like, even if you have the skills, most clients don't know that. And they want proof of the pudding, as it were. And so, if you can visualize for them the potential of what their brand can look like through your fake portfolio, they're sold because
Yeah.
they don't have the imagination to do that. And seeing it allows them to believe in it.
Yeah, I think it helps a lot too when you find yourself in a field where you feel passionate and like interested enough in this like craft or whatever it is that you're taking part of, that you're going to be like making this stuff anyways, right? Like
Mm,
for me to be able to like make a whole bunch of art or like illustrations or branding or logos or whatever, um, like I was going to make those things anyways. I was just
Yeah.
going to like create all that art. So I'm going to have this portfolio of work of stuff that I just like had this impulse and like inclination to create anyways. And so once you have this big body of work, you can just show that off and like no one cares that it wasn't for a client. Nobody cared that, your 30 days of typography wasn't paid. They just want to see that you made a whole bunch of cool letters.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So what's your hope for the future? I mean, any plans? What are you looking forward to? Where do you want to take boring friends?
I don't know. um, I feel like I'm at a real, like, I guess crossroads of sorts of what I'm doing where I feel like I'm spinning a lot of different plates kind
Mm.
of, which is cool. Like I feel like I have the freedom where I get to try all these different things. Um, but once you're doing too many things at once, I feel like it's hard to like really specialize in something and get really good at that like one or two things that you can offer rather than being like medium good at 100 different things. So so I think this year for me is really trying to figure out what it is that I want to lean into, like whether it is just like doing a whole bunch of client work and just sort of like building up who it is that I'm working with and, maybe get like better and better clients for, you know, more money or more interesting work or more visibility,
Mm,
or whether I move that more to the back burner and start concentrating more on like the apparel design and like the selling products, whether it's like prints or shirts or wallpapers or whatever, and seeing if I can, make a decent living that way. Um, Doing more sort of like speaking engagements like this, doing more sort of like like, this is, I mean, you've like really tapped into like the chaos that is my brain of what is coming next because I'm still sort of trying to figure it out. But a lot of the sort of like leaning into the anti gatekeeping of design and like being able
mm,
to like essentially I guess like more teaching like telling
yeah.
people here's how you do this stuff, here's how I got here, um and like community building as well, like giving people a means of connecting with other artists and other people doing similar things so that they have that sort of like community of peers around them to give them the encouragement that they need to like sort of keep going. So being some sort of like um you know vessel or like medium or something that helps them get to that stage as well. I think I started the sentence off by how I'm going to like really focus on one thing and then just describe like the 10 different things that I want to do all simultaneously while focusing on one thing. And so I've got a lot of work to do.
Well, it's still all within one area, so I'll give you that. But it's all connected, so it's a good thing. And speaking of opportunities, tell me one piece of advice you'd give the next generation or a new graphic designer or designer coming up in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it really is just telling people that like you can just start like today. Like you don't need anyone's permission to make art. You don't need anyone, you don't have to like check off a certain number of boxes of like, okay, well, I want to start making art, but I have to go take classes for it first. Or I want to
Mm,
start doing this type of work for people, but I've never done it for them before. Or I want to like organize this type of meetup, but I've never organized that kind of thing before. I don't have the qualifications or whatever. Like,
yeah.
I think I spent a lot of years with those types of sort of like self-limiting beliefs, like I'm not supposed to be there. I'm not supposed to be doing that type of thing. So I won't even ask or I won't even put it out there. But I think like crazy things start to happen when you actually like put yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit and just test it,
Mm,
and just like test to see what happens if you actually do make the art or if you try to like connect with other people. So yeah, I think it's just that like um I don't really have a concise way of saying it necessarily other than to just start making stuff and just start trying things and put yourself out there. And I think once you have done it enough times and you realize that even the times where it doesn't work out or the times where you would count it as like a failure or as something that like didn't go the way that was planned, you start to learn that that really wasn't like the end of the world, and like no one died, nothing like set on fire.
Yeah.
And so to try it again after you failed is like really not that tough, because you know the consequences aren't that like terrifying. So you just do it over and over again. Um, yeah, just do it, I think is what I would say. And I will copyright that. And if I find out that anyone beat me to that, I'm going to be very disappointed, and I'll probably just give up on everything.
Excellent. I think that's fantastic advice. I'm actually trying to write a book called Just Start. So,
You're going to get sued by Nike.
just start, not just do it.
Yeah, that's fine.
um, but uh, last question for you. What does the word fruitful mean to you? And what does it feel like to live a fruitful life?
Just being able to have as many oranges, I think, in my life as possible. If I can buy all the oranges that I need, which I made very clear was my favorite fruit at the start of this podcast. Um, no, fruitful life, I think for me is just having the freedom to kind of express yourself the way that you want to, right? And to be able to do work that you find fulfilling, that doesn't
Mm.
feel like work, and work that grants you the opportunity to connect with others via your art and your perspective on things. So yeah, I guess a fruitful life is just making art.
Thank you so much. Hey, and thank you for listening to this episode of The Fruitful Life. I hope you walk away with some nuggets of wisdom from Ben. And if you did, please do me a huge favor and leave a rating and a comment to let me know what you think of this show. Also, consider telling a friend that might like it. As always, be true, be you, stay fruitful.